25 Depression-era money tricks that double as wilderness survival skills the outdoor industry hopes you never learn. There's something the survival experts don't want you to understand. The skills that kept families alive when the banks collapsed aren't hidden in expensive manuals or sold at outdoor retailers. They were hiding in plain sight, embedded in the daily routines of people who learned to survive not because they wanted an adventure, but because the alternative was starvation. When I started researching this, I found something I didn't expect. The Depression-era families who thrived weren't the wealthiest. They were the ones who had already learned wilderness thinking long before the economy failed. Stay with me, because near the end of this video, I'm going to show you the one practice that connects every single one of these skills together, the pattern that changes how you see both money and survival. If you've been watching survival content for any length of time, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear contradicts almost everything the outdoor industry teaches. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these skills your own family used to practice. I want to hear your story. Wait, hold on. There's something critical I need you to understand right from the start. The mechanics behind why these tricks worked aren't what you've been taught. They're explained in absolute detail in our complete Wilderness Survival Economy Guide, available in the description and pinned comment. That guide walks through the signals, the systems, the exact reasoning that made each of these strategies work. It's a paid resource, but if you're serious about understanding this material beyond surface level, it's where the real foundation sits. Now, let's begin with the first principle, and it's something nobody talks about anymore. Number 25, the compartmentalization principle. This isn't about budgeting spreadsheets or apps. In 1934, a family in rural Pennsylvania kept their money, whatever they had, in a small wooden box divided into sections. Each section had a purpose: seed money for spring, salt money for winter, emergency money for sickness. What sounds like simple organizing was actually something much more sophisticated. It was making abstract resources concrete. When money lives in your bank account, it's invisible. You can pretend you have more than you do. You can borrow against it. The account tells you a number, not a truth. But when you hold coins in a wooden compartment, and you can see exactly how many remain, something shifts. You're no longer dealing with an abstract concept. You're dealing with material reality. Your mind has to confront what's actually there. Wilderness survival teaches you the same principle. If you're lost in the forest, you don't think about abstract resources. You have 6 matches. You have 1 liter of water. You have 2 hours of daylight left. Real numbers. Concrete objects. The moment you start calculating in abstractions, you make mistakes. You die. A family surviving the Depression learned to think like someone lost in the wilderness. They didn't trust abstract numbers. They trusted what they could see, touch, count. This is why families that remembered farming practices, the ones who understood seasonal resources, crop rotation, preservation, they didn't just survive. Many of them prospered while their neighbors starved. They already knew how to compartmentalize. They already understood that a resource you cannot see is a resource you've lost. Number 24, the practice of intentional scarcity. This sounds backward. Why would you intentionally make yourself poorer? A mother in Iowa in 1935 did something most modern financial advisors would call sabotage. She took her weekly wages and immediately put 80% of it in a place where she couldn't touch it. Not a bank. Banks were collapsing. She gave the money to her sister in a town 3 miles away, with explicit instructions not to return it without written permission from her husband. This wasn't deprivation, it was strategy. The money was gone. Not lost. Gone. She couldn't access it on impulse. She couldn't rationalize borrowing from it during an emergency. The emergency would have to be solved with what remained. This forced her family to live on less, to become creative, to build skills. A person learning wilderness survival faces the same principle. You don't pack your backpack with everything you might possibly need. That would make it too heavy to move. Instead, you pack only what you can carry, forcing yourself to prioritize ruthlessly. You learn to work with less. You develop the skill of creative problem solving under constraint. The families that created intentional scarcity for themselves during the Depression didn't do it because they enjoyed hunger. They did it because scarcity builds competence. And competence, not money, was what would save them. The outdoor industry doesn't teach this. They teach you to buy better gear, more weight capacity, more options. But the families that actually survived hard times didn't need more options. They needed fewer choices and deeper skills. Number 23, resource documentation. A woman in Brooklyn kept a small notebook. Every plant that grew in the lot behind her building was sketched and labeled. Every use for those plants was written down. When spring came and the wild greens appeared, She didn't forage randomly. She knew exactly what was edible, because she had spent months the previous summer studying and recording. She had created her own field guide, made specific to her exact geographic location. This practice kept people alive. Today, we assume wilderness knowledge comes from apps and expensive courses. But survival during the Depression worked differently. People documented what they observed. They recorded what worked. They tested it. They wrote it down again. A fishing journal that noted which moon phases brought the best catch. A record of which roots could be harvested without killing the plant. Which bark stripped cleanly in spring but became useless by August. The outdoor industry doesn't want you keeping journals. Journals are free. They work forever. They're specific to your location, your climate, your actual conditions. Number 22. Seasonal preparation calendars. A family in Vermont marked their calendar by what the land demanded. January meant checking stored vegetables for rot. February meant planting the spring garden. March meant collecting birch bark before the sap flowed. April meant fishing the spawning runs. May meant hunting morel mushrooms in specific groves. Every month had its harvesting task, its preparation, its deadline. They didn't hike whenever they felt like it. They moved according to what the season offered. A family that followed this rhythm never faced sudden shortages. They couldn't be caught unprepared because the calendar held the answers. There were no surprises because everything had a predetermined season. Modern survival instruction sells you spontaneity. Grab your pack, head into the woods, trust your instincts. But that's not how people survived scarcity. They prepared months in advance. They knew exactly what would be available when. They moved predictably and deliberately. Number 21. Water source mapping. Before there were water purification tablets, before portable filters, families mapped every reliable water source within a day's walk of their home. Springs, streams that never ran dry in summer, rainwater catchment points. They tested the water. They knew which sources were safe and which required boiling. They understood the watershed. They could predict where water would be when the season changed. An elderly man outside Pittsburgh maintained a hand-drawn map showing 7 different water sources. He marked seasonal reliability on each one. Spring runoff made some sources unreliable in May, but perfect in July. Others flowed year-round but tasted of minerals. One source froze solid in winter, but stayed cold and clear all summer. The water industry built itself on convincing you that water requires technology, but your great-grandmother carried a bucket and knew where to fill it. She knew it by heart. No GPS, no app, no subscription required. Before we continue, I need to be clear about something. This information becomes useful only when you understand the deeper systems behind these techniques, the patterns, the reasons they worked, how they connect to each other. That's exactly what our complete guide covers in full detail. You'll find it in the description and pinned comment. It's where we break down the actual mechanics of how Depression-era families integrated all these practices into a coherent survival system. It's paid material, but it transforms these individual tricks into something you can actually apply. Number 20. Tool maintenance logs. A carpenter who survived the Depression kept a notebook about every tool he owned. When the saw was sharpened, when the axe head was refitted, when the handles needed replacing, what oil worked best on which hinges. He didn't replace tools. He maintained them so carefully that tools lasted decades. Tools in his hands became extensions of his knowledge. He understood every weakness, every limitation, every capability. He could fix a tool in the field with materials around him. Compare that to now. Tools break. You replace them. Equipment fails. You buy new gear. The outdoor industry sells replacement, not maintenance. They profit from failure. Number 19. Foraged food rotation. A woman in the Appalachians didn't forage randomly during good seasons. She foraged strategically, taking some but never all of what grew. She moved through the forest in patterns, ensuring that plants would return the following year. She gathered in ways that actually encouraged growth. She documented which areas would be abundant in which seasons based on her harvest patterns. This wasn't wilderness poetry. This was deliberate resource management. She had a 3-year rotation planned. Areas left completely untouched one year, lightly harvested the next, heavily harvested the third, then back to untouched. She was farming the forest without planting anything. The land provided because she understood reciprocity. Take what you need, leave what regenerates life. Number 18. Animal tracking journals. Families recorded animal movement patterns with the same care they tracked plants, where deer moved in spring, when rabbits became plentiful, which streams held fish in drought years. A man in Ohio kept records for 20 years. He knew that every 7 years, following a specific weather pattern, squirrels would be exceptionally abundant. He could predict it. Others around him saw abundance or scarcity as random. He saw patterns. The patterns worked because they were real. Number 17. Understanding soil as a survival asset. Families knew their soil the way modern people know their phone screens. They could feel it, squeeze it, smell it after rain. A mother in Kentucky could walk 3 acres and tell you which plots held moisture longest in dry seasons, which corners stayed too waterlogged for root crops, where the bedrock sat closest to the surface. This knowledge came from years of observation, not from extension office pamphlets. She taught her children to read soil texture, to see clay as different from loam, to recognize when nutrients had been depleted. That woman's property produced food for 11 people during the hungriest years. Her neighbors with the same acreage went hungry. Number 16. Seasonal mapping of wild edibles. Every region has edible plants. Most people never notice them. Depression families had maps, though not the kind you buy. Mental maps. A girl in Tennessee knew that ramps grew in specific hollows, mushrooms after particular rain patterns, greens in the spring that tasted better than anything from a store, nuts in the fall, concentrated in certain oak groves. She knew these places like other people know grocery aisles. Her family ate well, not because they had money, but because they understood what their land actually provided. The outdoor industry now sells guidebooks for $40 that teach what these families knew by memory. Number 15. Water source diversification. Never rely on one water source. A family that depended only on a single well was vulnerable. Drought arrived. The well dried. That family died. Families who survived located 3 sources at minimum: a spring, a creek, a cistern they maintained themselves. Some dug multiple shallow wells across their property. Some collected runoff into clay-lined basins. Some maintained ponds that also served as fish habitat. They treated water the way modern survival instructors do, as the primary concern. Number 14. Medicinal plant cultivation. Families grew medicines the way they grew food. Comfrey for wounds, feverfew for headaches, peppermint for stomach troubles, garlic for infections. They understood dosage. They understood preparation. A woman in West Virginia grew St. John's wort specifically for the emotional weight that came with losing children to disease. She knew it worked because she had watched it work across generations. Modern pharmaceutical companies have spent billions proving these plants work. They just prefer you did not know you could grow them yourself. Before we continue, keep this in mind for a second. The patterns you are seeing here are not separate tricks. They are components of a single system, a philosophy of self-reliance built on observation, on patience, and on understanding that resources are only limited if you do not know where to find them. The complete guide to integrating these patterns into a modern survival practice is available in the description and in the pinned comment. It breaks down the exact mechanics of why this knowledge worked, how to rebuild these systems on your own property, and which patterns apply to your specific climate and geography. It is the ebook that goes deep, where this video can only gesture at the surface. Number 13. Understanding microclimates on your land. No 2 acres are identical. A Depression family studied their specific property to identify microclimates. The south-facing slope warmed first in spring. The north-facing hollow stayed coolest in summer. The low point where cold air settled on winter nights. The high point where wind velocity increased. They planted crops according to these microclimates, not according to general planting guides. A family gardening against their microclimate fought the land. A family gardening with it barely worked at all. They still produced food when neighboring farms failed. Number 12. Seed saving as financial strategy. Every productive plant was allowed to go to seed. Beans, squash, greens, root vegetables. The family saved those seeds for the next year. After 5 seasons, they had varieties specifically adapted to their soil, their water, their particular microclimate. Those seeds did not cost money. They generated abundance year after year. A man in North Carolina had a bean variety his family had selected for 60 years. That bean was more productive in his soil than any commercial seed. It was worth nothing to a seed company. It was worth everything to him. Number 11. Creating food preservation capacity before you need it. Families did not wait until harvest to build smokehouses. They did not construct root cellars in September. These structures existed year-round. When food arrived, the preservation infrastructure was ready. A root cellar maintains temperature and humidity without electricity. A smokehouse cures meat through smoke and salt. A family with these structures could preserve surplus through winter. A family without them watched food rot. The difference was preparation, not luck. Number 10. Understanding predator ecology on your property. Families kept records of which predators hunted which prey in which seasons. A fox population indicated a rabbit surplus. Hawks suggested smaller bird abundance. Coyotes meant deer were present. Rather than seeing predators as enemies to be destroyed, they were indicators. When the coyote showed up, a hunting family knew the deer had returned to their territory. Predators told you what the land held. You simply had to know how to listen. Number 9. Reading water systems like a survival manual. Depression-era families understood that water revealed everything about the land. Where water moved fast, soil was shallow. Where it pooled, the ground held clay. Fish in a stream meant the water stayed cool enough year-round. Absence of fish meant temperature swings or pollution upstream. A family would inspect creeks and springs on their property, the way modern engineers inspect with expensive equipment. They used their eyes and their knowledge instead. A spring that never froze was gold. That meant consistent groundwater flow, which meant reliable water through winter. Families would build homes and smokehouses near those springs. They would plan gardens in areas where water collected. They would avoid building in flood zones by studying water patterns over years, not just during rainy seasons. This was not superstition. This was applied hydrology, learned through observation. Number 8. Using fire as a land management tool. Controlled burns kept forests healthy. They reduced catastrophic wildfire risk. They cleared underbrush, making hunting easier. They stimulated new growth that attracted game. Yet after fire suppression policies took hold in the early 1900s, people forgot this knowledge entirely. Depression families still used it. They burned their fields in spring to prepare soil for planting. They set careful fires in timber to maintain game trails and reduce fuel loads. Modern forestry is rediscovering what these families knew. Fire is a tool, not just a danger. Number 7. Building natural shelter barriers against wind and cold. Instead of fighting the elements, families shaped their land to work with them. Windbreaks of dense trees planted on the north and west sides of homesteads reduced heating costs dramatically. A house sheltered by trees used less fuel. Less fuel meant survival through longer winters. Some families planted hedgerows. Others allowed scrub oak to grow thick. The investment paid off for decades. A modern suburban home with no windbreak might require 30 cords of wood to heat through winter. The same home, protected by mature trees and vegetation, might need 15. Before we continue, and I want you to hold this next part in your mind for a moment. Everything you are hearing connects to something deeper. The patterns behind these techniques, the actual mechanisms that make them work, and the way they stack together to create real resilience. That is exactly what the comprehensive guide explores. It is detailed, practical, and it goes into the territorial logic and seasonal timing that turn these individual tricks into a complete system. If you want to understand not just what to do, but why these methods outlasted every financial crisis and weather event the wilderness threw at them, that guide is in the description and pinned to the top comment. It is a paid resource, and it is worth your time. Number 6. Composting food waste into garden soil. No family threw away vegetable scraps, eggshells, or bone. These went into a pit or a barrel. Over months, they became rich soil. This soil fed the next year's garden. Gardens fed the family. A family with strong compost production never needed to buy fertilizer. Their waste became their wealth. Modern gardeners spend $40 a bag on compost that breaks down in 2 seasons. Depression families made it for free, and it lasted longer because they understood carbon to nitrogen ratios without knowing the technical name. Number 5. Tracking seasonal migration patterns of game animals. Families knew exactly when deer moved to higher ground. They knew when elk came down from winter ranges. They understood the timing because they paid attention across years. One hunter might follow the same migration route for 20 years, watching how drought shifted timing, how warm springs accelerated movement, how snow depth changed everything. This knowledge meant the difference between filling a larder or watching your family go hungry. A modern hunter might see a deer and feel lucky. A Depression-era hunter moved through the forest knowing where and when deer would be because he had studied the pattern for 2 decades. The outdoor industry wants you to believe this knowledge requires expensive guides, GPS units, and annual subscription services. Families managed it with notebooks, observation, and patience. Number 4. Building small animal traps from natural materials. Wire traps require manufactured wire. Snare traps require rope. But deadfall traps require stones, sticks, and gravity. A figure 4 deadfall can be constructed in 10 minutes with nothing but materials lying on the forest floor. It catches rabbits, squirrels, and small game reliably. A family with 3 deadfalls set regularly catches enough small game to supplement protein through winter. This is the technique that made the outdoor industry nervous. Once people understood how simple and effective these traps were, they stopped buying commercial trapping equipment. They stopped paying for guided hunting trips. They relied on their own knowledge. Number 3. Using animal processing to create usable materials. A deer provides meat, yes, but it also provides hide for clothing or shelter, sinew for cord, bones for tools, and organs for specific purposes. Depression families wasted nothing. A hide became leather through careful processing. Sinew became fishing line and thread. Bones became needle cases, hooks, or tools. Antlers became handles or decorative elements. A modern hunter might take the backstraps and leave the rest for scavengers. A depression family extracted value from every part. The financial industry never wanted you to know this worked. When families could process their own materials, they did not need to buy leather goods. They did not need to purchase cord or thread. They did not need commercial fishing hooks. A single deer could sustain a family for weeks through meat alone, but the real economy existed in everything else. Modern outdoor manufacturers build entire businesses around materials that depression families made for free. Gore-Tex jackets, synthetic climbing ropes, mass-produced fishing tackle. All of it exists because the market decided you should never learn to process raw materials yourself. Before we continue, hold on for a second, because this part matters more than you might think right now. The detailed mechanisms of how these materials transform, the exact temperatures for hide tanning, the processing techniques for sinew, the preservation methods that kept everything from spoiling, all of that is covered step by step in the complete survival guide available in the description and pinned in the comments. That ebook walks through the underlying patterns that made these Depression-era techniques work so reliably. Not just theory, actual process. Number 2. Building water collection systems. A person can survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water. No margin exists. Depression families understood this absolutely. They built systems to capture morning dew. A piece of cloth draped across vegetation overnight would hold enough water to fill a vessel by dawn. They dug wells near natural water sources and lined them with clay or stones to keep the water clean. They understood which plants held water in their roots or stems. They knew which trees produced usable sap. They read the landscape for springs and underground water by watching where animals gathered. Modern survival gear companies sell expensive water filters and purification tablets. Those products work, but they depend on you not knowing the older methods. A depression family with cloth and knowledge needed no filter. The water they collected through dew systems or from deep wells stayed clean because they understood contamination before they ever heard the word microbe. A commercial water filter costs $30. A family that knew how to read the land and construct collection systems paid nothing. Number 1. And this is the skill that unified everything else on this list. It sits at the center of why the outdoor industry spent decades and millions to bury it. The ability to read natural signs and predict weather, seasons, and animal movement without any instruments at all. A depression family knew the world through observation. Cloud patterns revealed tomorrow's weather. Wind direction predicted storms. Animal behavior announced seasonal changes. The angle of the sun told them time. The position of stars guided them. Frost patterns showed where water would freeze. The condition of tree bark revealed how harsh a winter would be. Insects gathering showed rain coming. Bird calls indicated predators nearby or food sources within walking distance. Modern technology made us believe we need apps and devices for this. Weather forecasts, GPS, trail maps, hunting season guides, all of it digital, all of it dependent on electricity and cellular signal. A person in the wilderness with no phone and no compass can feel completely lost. A depression family felt found. They understood that the world speaks constantly if you know how to listen. The sky speaks, the animals speak, the plants speak, water speaks, weather speaks, season speaks. Learning to read these signs takes time, months, years, but the knowledge costs nothing to acquire. It cannot be monetized. It cannot be patented. It cannot be sold as a subscription or an app upgrade. This single skill, the ability to observe and interpret the natural world, made every other survival technique on this list possible. Without it, you are just following instructions. With it, you are thinking. An outdoor industry that makes billions teaching people to be dependent on gear does not want that kind of independence existing in the culture. A person who can read the weather needs no weather app. A person who can navigate by stars needs no GPS device. A person who can predict animal movement needs no hunting app. A person who can identify edible plants needs no survival guide purchased from a retailer. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning. The real reason the outdoor industry needed you to forget these tricks. It was never about money efficiency alone. It was never just about stretching a dollar or making supplies last longer. Those were symptoms. The actual disease, from their perspective, was self-sufficiency itself. Depression-era families possess something that modern survival culture actively works to erase. They possess the ability to look at their environment and extract what they needed without asking permission from a corporation. They did not need a manufacturer's guidebook to build a shelter. They did not need a brand name on their tools. They did not need an algorithm telling them when to plant, when to hunt, when to move, when to wait. The outdoor industry generates roughly $400 billion annually. That number depends entirely on convincing you that your survival is complicated, that your safety requires their products, that your knowledge is incomplete without their expertise, their courses, their equipment, their apps, their subscriptions. Every item I described in these 25 tricks directly undermines that business model. The Depression-era family did not buy a water filtration system because they understood how to find clean water and how to test it. They did not purchase a navigation device because they read the stars and the landscape itself. They did not subscribe to a wilderness education platform because knowledge was embedded in community, passed through generations, learned by doing. An industry built on selling you solutions to problems you never knew you had cannot exist in a culture of self-reliant people. So they did not just erase the tricks, they erased the confidence that allowed people to try. Marketing shifted, educational curricula changed, cultural narratives flipped. Survival became something you purchased instruction for, rather than something you developed by paying attention. A child born in 1930 learned to recognize edible plants the way you learned to recognize letters. It was automatic, embedded, casual. A child born in 2000 learns that wilderness is dangerous and requires professional equipment and professional guidance to navigate safely. One grows into a person who can feed themselves. The other grows into a customer. The 25 tricks I laid out across this entire video are not recommendations for how you should live. I am not suggesting you abandon modern medicine or reject electricity or live in a cabin. What I am suggesting is this. You have been systematically taught to distrust your own judgment about what you can accomplish with what is available to you. That distrust generates an enormous amount of profit for an enormous number of companies. It also generates anxiety, dependency, and a creeping sense that you are somehow inadequate without their help. Depression-era families were not braver or smarter than you are. They simply had not yet been convinced that they were incompetent. When faced with a problem, they asked what they had available rather than what they needed to buy. That simple shift in perspective changed everything. You have the same capability. You have access to the same natural world. You have a brain that works exactly the way theirs worked. The only difference is permission. You have been told, constantly and from every direction, that you need permission and products and expertise before you can trust yourself in that world. Here is what happens when you start ignoring that message. You begin to notice things. You begin to trust your observations. You begin to experiment. You begin to understand your environment, not as a threat that requires professional-grade equipment to survive, but as a system you can learn to read, to work with, to live within. Do one thing this week that proves to yourself that you can solve a problem without buying a solution. Preserve food without a vacuum sealer. Navigate somewhere without GPS. Start a fire without a lighter. Build something useful from materials you found. Read weather signs instead of checking a forecast. That one small act of independence is how it begins. That is where the tricks become not just historical curiosities but living skills. And that is where the industry loses its grip. Thank you for staying with me through all 25 of these. If you found this perspective valuable, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video that challenges the narratives you have been sold. Drop a comment and tell me which of these tricks feels most impossible to you right now. I genuinely want to know. And hit that notification bell so you catch the next one the moment it goes live.